Yeah, good evening, everybody. So thank you all for joining the State of AI in the Enterprise panel discussion. We have a very distinguished panel here with varying backgrounds from different sectors. So before we get started, just a very quick introduction as Murthy Garu said about myself. My name is Shailesh Basani and I'm currently working at Adobe as a Director of Reliability Engineering, and I'm responsible for our site reliability engineering and observability charters. Prior to Adobe, I was with Citrix Systems for many years, leading engineering teams in the areas of networking and distributed systems. And both at Citrix and Adobe, I worked very closely with AI products, mostly related to AI ops for optimizing cloud computing instances, anomaly detection, predicting failures, and troubleshooting complex issues. So that's a brief introduction about myself. Now I would like to request our panelists to introduce themselves. Can each of you please take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, including your current focus areas? We have Srini here. I thought he was part of the panel. Srini, are you there? Okay, I don't see Srini. So
yeah, we don't see him yet.
Okay.
So you guys go ahead and he will probably join.
Go ahead, please. Helen, please, can you please go ahead, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Helen Yu. I'm currently the founder and CEO of Tigon Advisory. I started this firm as a growth accelerator 3 years ago. So I spent my first year working with an AI startup. It was a conversational AI company where we grew it from 1 vertical to 3 verticals. We also took them from 2 customers to 36 customers and grew their ARR by 25 times within a year. So 18 months ago, I became advisor at Pipestream. That's another conversational AI company out of New York. So I've been having 2.5-year journey working with AI. But prior to this, I was with Oracle for 12 years, Adobe for 3 years, and Marketo for 4 years. So I'm honored to be here with all of you and look forward to our discussion.
Helen, thank you. Good to know. I mean, I'll reach out to you offline on Adobe and Marketo experience now that I'm at Adobe, but thank you for the introduction. Very nice to have you here. Kim, Naess, please, thank you for joining from, you said Norway, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Middle of it, appreciate it. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So my name is Kim Naess. I'm working for Hitachi as a Chief Solutions Architect. I've been lucky enough to travel around Europe and meet several of our both internal customers, internal Hitachi customers. We have about 800 companies within the Hitachi brand that Hitachi Vantara has been supporting on their digital transformation journey. Not everyone at the same time, but on a different path, each and every one of them, and also helping our clients. On a side note, I've also been 5 years with Oracle, and I've also have a personal friend actually who's called Mark Templeton, who you might know.
Okay.
I've met him a couple of times, and we've been having a lot of fun discussing Teslas, as he was one of the early not investors, but the early buyer of a Tesla, as I was myself. I'm also on the Research Council for Norway, working as a subject matter expert within AI and IoT, granting public grants to applications. And I'm also on a computer association as a board member for BI Analytics. Thanks.
Thank you. Very broad portfolio. Very nice to hear. And thank you for taking part today. Okay. Sourabh, can you please go ahead?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sourabh. I currently work at this startup called Niva, which is focused on how do you build a privacy-focused search engine without sacrificing personalization, where like oftentimes like when we've thought about privacy, the trade-off has been like no user preference, but that kind of ends up as a bad experience. So how do you explore areas like federated learning to do search better? Prior to that, I used to work on TensorFlow. I led one of the subgroups in TensorFlow at Google Brain.
Thank you, Sourabh. Yeah, welcome. Yeah. So Vikas.
This is Vikas Shah. I'm a chief architect in Knights of Columbus. I joined them in 2019. We are actually inserting the data science and AI program within Knights of Columbus. Focused areas is financial services, investment, insurance, and fraternal. Since we are 100-year-old not-for-profit organization, we have a lot of interest and a lot of data to run the AI and AI ops and ML ops for those verticals. Okay. In past, I worked with Ernst & Young and Wipro Technologies in their data science and AI practices.
Thank you, Vikas. Yeah, welcome aboard. Yeah. Do we have anybody else? Like, did Srini join? I don't see on the video, but join the audio.
No, not yet.
No,
I don't think so.
okay.
Lena can answer. Lena, do you have any update on Srini?
Not yet. Please go ahead. Right.
That's okay.
Okay,
Let's
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I
Again,
assume that that's all you have today.
sure. No,
Yeah.
this is perfect. We have such a great AI brain power here. So I'm sure we can pick their brains with some of the thoughts we have around AI in enterprise. But definitely, this is a new format for all of us in this year. Very interesting year for all of us. Hope all of your families, all of you doing well through COVID, through everything else going on around the world. I just wanted to make sure that everybody is safe, healthy, and going through these unprecedented times. Okay. So in the format today, basically we will have the panelists answer 1 or 2 questions, and then we will turn over to audience for any questions. Okay. So with that, let's move on to the first question for today. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how things are going in the enterprise on AI front, right? All of you have been in this space for a few years now. So we have seen AI deployed across a wide spectrum of use cases to solve business problems, from managing and automating IT infrastructure, to gleaning new insights about customers, to identifying and responding to cyber threats, to helping guide medical decisions, to improve the hiring processes, etc. AI is increasingly being integrated into the fabric of businesses. However, not everyone has adopted AI technologies yet. There are still barriers, and many are working to scale the benefits of AI. But it appears though that AI's early adopter phase is ending. The market is now moving into early majority phase as per Deloitte's State of AI in the Enterprise Research. IDC also forecasts the spending on AI technologies will grow to almost $97.9 billion in 2023, more than 2.5 times the spend level of 2019. So as we can see, a number of enterprises are continuing to spend on AI technologies, but there continue to be impediments, especially when deploying the solutions in production. So can you talk about the impediments that you're facing in your organization, maybe or your clients that you work with, and some ideas on how we are working to overcome them? So feel free, I mean, if whoever wants to go first, again, feel free to do that, or else I can call out whatever. I know this in this format, it's different world, but again, feel free if you want to go ahead, anybody. Yeah.
So I'll start. Our major concern is the data. Okay, the quality of the data, the number of sources that we have to get the data from, and the dimensions that we think that would actually strategize and have a conscious decisions from AI and ML, right? Because ourselves are not confident about our data, which are really, as I was mentioning, 100-year-old, right? Some of the data are in images, how to gather them. So even if we get the, the sophisticated ML algorithms implied, right? As Sourabh said, the TensorFlow, right? We are not sure how the result is being impacted on overall perspective to the business and the customer, okay? So that is the primary challenge that we are facing in terms of adapting AI. Other questions remains open is that how to operationalize those decisions across the multiple departments, right? Because we have a multiple line of businesses, there are overlaps in the customers, overlaps into the lot of the kind of financials, and how to actually accommodate that into our models. That is the secondary aspect and the challenge for us.
Okay, thank you.
And I can
Please
pick up.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so and I can pick up on that one with regards, and I can second that with regards to the collection of data and the discovery of data. So especially for working with a lot of, especially Hitachi's older companies, industrial companies, they weren't exactly born digital, if you know what I mean. So helping them and guiding them on the path of making them discover where we can attach sensors, where we can build sensors, what kind of data we need to gather is perhaps the first start of the journey. Being an advisor, and we need to work with our domain experts in order for us to understand what they are looking for, but then to also understand what kind of data we should be either starting to collect or starting to create in order for us to find the insights that are interesting for them. So we are meeting a lot of the industrial challenges with working with companies that are not so used to working with analytics and the AI practice, but are really eager to get started. So trying to get into an ML ops, machine learning operations, that's hard, but it's our duty and it's our obligation to be there and to help them and guide them on that journey, being that advisor. But it is a challenge, definitely.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Yeah. Anything you want to add, Helen?
Yeah, I would look at the barriers from 3 different categories. Having worked with a lot of Fortune 100 companies as they embark the AI journey. So the first one is enterprise readiness. If you think about the company culture, oftentimes in a large organization, the IT and business priority are misaligned, right? To agree on where they focus, how they prioritize, that alone would take some time. So secondly is the lack of skilled people, and then very challenging for them to hire, not to know what type of profile people to hire, and then even with existing workforce, how they upscale them so they're capable of running a large AI initiative. And then data, obviously, that's part of the readiness. And the second category is the psychological impact, right? There's fear about security, privacy concerns. If you're in a highly regulated industry, which I work with financial services oftentimes, a fear to even be in the cloud environment, right? And there's trust issue as well. Do you trust the data? And then there's also challenge to figure out how you measure the value of AI. How do you articulate that, right, to measure the benefit? And then thirdly, for some early adopters I've worked with, they are challenged to find a starting point. There's lack of understanding of AI in general, right? We hear about the use cases, but when you trying to apply that to your business, it becomes a very daunting task. And then oftentimes the AI is not embedded in their overarching strategy. So you can't just stock a technology, right, like into a very old infrastructure. So this is back to Kim's point earlier. So you have to really think about how do you refresh your infrastructure with AI embedded as part of the strategy. And then, so all those are really the 3 things that really hinders companies' AI adoption in general.
Yeah, I would second that one. Basically, I think few challenges which I've observed are, one, I think hiring is hard, where I think it is very hard to differentiate someone who, given a problem, can solve it versus framing a problem themselves. When you have unclean data, you have what data should you collect, what data should you process, and it is not about plugging in an existing model. I think that barrier is 100x compared to, hey, here's some data and can you tune a model? And I think what we have seen in ML education, if you check online courses or anything, oftentimes the focus has been on the data is already there, and the problem's like 100x worse when the data is not already there. And that barrier, like the talent barrier, definitely does exist there. Second, I think, like to Helen's point about where to start, I think like oftentimes it's this like investment period where there's a learning curve for this organization, and like the returns aren't measured directly within like a short horizon. So if you are measuring the what is this team or investment worth it within like a year time frame, then like oftentimes it doesn't justify displacing like your existing processes. So you have to kind of look at it from a much longer horizon point of view, because there's like hiring takes time, collecting data takes time, building like operations takes time. So it kind of falls into R&D, which will eventually become product, but that's a hard trade-off to make. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Sourabh, that's a very good point that you brought about, right? In terms of how we can take this to production, because still research shows that more than 70 to 75% of the work is prototyped, is it in staging, it's in QA environments, but taking it to production is a completely different ball game, right? So I think that's a very good point. And Helen, you also touched upon the skill sets aspect. I was starting to get worried when first two speakers didn't talk about skills, because I hear so much in the media and everywhere that everywhere they're starting up so many courses around universities because the significant skill sets shortage for AI and data science. But I think let me just summarize a couple of things, and then I can take any more points from you guys. So I see 4 themes that you talked about at a high level for our participants. I just want to summarize. First thing is about data. Can we use the data? In what format it is? Can we ingest it really properly? Can we actually start using feature engineering or deep learning with that? That's the first aspect I'm clearly hearing. The second aspect is I'm hearing about institutionalizing the whole organization, right? To be able to adopt this, like where to start and how to put this into the picture, especially you have a lot of manual practices and stuff, how you institutionalize the whole process is the second thing that I'm hearing. The third thing is around ML education, the skill sets and hiring. There's a very big shortage that everybody is talking about, right? And the other aspect also, I think Helen, you brought about is about, we talked about psychological barrier or trust and things like that. And the other aspect in this space is what we call explainability of the model, right? Especially in the regulated industries you talked about. I think these are the 4 broad themes that I think at least I've seen, which are in some sense barriers or maybe taking to next level. Is there anything that I missed that you guys want to add, and any broad theme that you think I missed?
Not as a general topic, but I do remember. I think it was Helen who mentioned the culture and the culture of gathering data and the data quality.
Yeah.
And I just had it's just a story from the UK where the UK during this Corona pandemic and the health officials, they were actually storing up to 16,000 records in an Excel file, and it maxed out at a file size. So they actually lost 16,000 confirmed Corona cases because they were storing it in Excel. So there's so many things that can go wrong in a data science project that you can't really control.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I would add to the Kim, Helen, about the culture. So Shailesh, did you watch Moneyball?
Yeah.
So so we have a similar challenge, right? We have a sales agent in the field. They know the business. They are doing it for 30 years. Some people are doing it for 40 years, right? And we come up with this data science model and we present it to them. And then we tell them, okay, this is the region and this kind of a, the age group you can target for the life insurance selling part, right? And our policy is that you need to be the member. So we dimensions those data in the way that they're ready to be the member and they can purchase the life insurance. When we go to the sales agent with our analysis and our results, right? And we have a sophisticated UI built for the agent and the portal and everything. They said, no, I know these people. I live in this area for last about 40 years. No, these guys are not going to be they are not going to join our council. The data is telling them that this is the high prospect but they do not agree. And, we have to repeatedly send those data. We got to kind of work hand in hand with them still first time, second time. And, if you look at the Moneyball, the coach, right? The coach, eventually in the 15th game, he sent the baseball player in the first place, right? So that's what we are facing the challenge with. That's the kind of cultural, nitty-gritty that we got to deal with when we apply those statistics and the AI platform into the real life business.
Yeah. I think Vikas, that's a very good point. It's kind of a good segue to my second question. When you talked about cultural barriers and things like that, right? Let's take the second question also, and before opening up to our audience, right? So definitely we talked about these few areas of challenges, impediments into the organization. So one of the aspects that also came to forefront, especially this year, is biases in AI, a bias in AI, right? So these biases can creep into AI algorithms in several ways, as you all know, right? The AI systems learn to make decisions based on training data, which can include human-based decisions biases or reflect historical and social inequities, even if sensitive variables such as gender, race, or sexual orientation are removed, right? So, for example, Amazon scrapped a secret AI recruiting tool that showed bias against women, right? And another source of bias is flawed data sampling, in which some groups are overrepresented or underrepresented in the training data, right? So especially this year, it became a lot more evident with everything that went on in the US and around the world, right? So are you seeing any such impediments in your organization's adoption of AI? If so, like, can you talk about ideas on how you're working to overcome them, or any in general ideas for the audience if you're not seeing in your own organization?
I can speak for myself, and I say that in at least in the field that I've been working so far, we haven't been able to spot too many biases, but that's mainly because we've been working mainly with machines and not too many human data. However, I think there's one other thing that I think is really important in order to mitigate the bias, and I think that is the ability to have an equality and a diversity in your data science field. There's a lot of bias being done just by having one gender or one I'm not getting the right word here, but if there's just one race doing everything, then you will be experiencing bias. So having a diverse a development of data science will be one of the one of the correct fixes in order to stop this. And then you also, of course, need to have the correct mitigation and the right tests in order for you to discover those as they are happening. So, but in our project, in the projects that I've been seeing so far, we haven't seen too much of them.
Okay, thank you. Kim, anybody else? Vikas, yeah,
I'll add to Kim. And also, we have a different kind of challenge in terms of the p-hacking and the bias classification, right? So traditionally, Knights of Columbus is specifically meant for the Christian man, right? And we have other way around. So we know that traditionally, that's how the Knights of Columbus has been started, and that's how we moved towards our entire line of business to support their families. We started introducing the life insurance. We started introducing the financial services. We acquired Boston Advisory in January, and then we have an investment portfolio of $25 billion, right? I mean, that's how the growth is. So it's not kind of a bias, but it is started with that. But now our Supreme Knight or our CEO, they are planning to introduce a mutual fund product to the broad range of people, not just the Christian man, but all over, right? Man, woman, any race, right? So now we have traditionally, we are focused, our models are focused on a Christian man, but we have to change these models and we have to look at the data that in a different angles or different perspective, because it's an entire new field and the prospects are opening up, right, for us. And nobody knows how, because traditionally we are in that particular mindset of, and that's the reason we are seeking a lot of external help from and we engage the partners and SIs to help with us to build those data perspective. And think about it. So if you are going in a broader perspective, besides our own data, we need more data, right? Because we traditionally, those are not part of our ecosystem at all. So we are trying to purchase those data from outside so that we are not biased, right? When we introduce this particular new product to the market.
So that's a good point. Anything you want to add, Helen or Sourabh, on that aspect?
Yeah, I actually worked with a Fortune 50 bank. They're trying to leverage AI to enhance their end user experience. For example, they want to create a conversational interface for users to interact with so that they can really eliminate the need for live agent. In order to really achieve that, we have to review the call center logs, right? We have to first decide, okay, here's the data set, here's the region we want to leverage. And then we create a matrix of use cases. Having gone through that design process, I learned tons. I learned that the underlying data are really most often the main source of the bias, right? It's not really it's not rather than the algorithm itself. Because if you think about company, when you build that, as everyone else said earlier, if you don't have a diverse, I look at the bias can be generated from three perspectives, right? People, data, and process. So if you have from people perspective, if you don't have a diverse machine learning team that they can ask different questions during the design, right? Probably you don't have people coming from different race, gender, age, experience, and culture inherently ask different questions and interact with your model in different ways, then it's going to be challenging for you to catch problems before your model is in production. Secondly, how do you also need to think about your target customer and users, because they may be very different than you, right? So you need to anticipate the people who are not like you, how they would interact with the AI model you build, and what are the problem might arise in doing that. So, and then secondly, the data, I think everybody talks a little bit about the data, but I think from data perspective, choosing the right learning model is so critical, right? When I say learning model, there's unsupervised model versus the supervised model. They both have their respective pros and cons. If you think about it, the unsupervised model cluster or do dimensional reduction can really learn bias from their data set. However, if belonging to a group, like say belonging to group A, highly correlates to behavior B, the model can mix up the two, right? And while supervised models allow for more control over bias in data selection, that control can introduce human bias into the process. And then also you need to select a representative training data set, right? I realized during the design process where if we only select the data for certain geographic area, it does not represent the other geo, then you may have biased sample or training data. When you use when the data has a poor quality, you use that to train the AI model, oftentimes you won't get the result you wanted to get. Thirdly is to understand your training data. It's so critical, right? Because both academic and commercial data sets can have classes and labels that introduce bias into your algorithms. The more you understand and own your data, the less likely you are going to be surprised by some objectionable labels. Thirdly is the process, because you gotta have a process to monitor your performance using real world data. Because oftentimes we talk about no company is knowingly creating the biased AI, of course. Unfortunately, the regulators, they don't typically take best intentions into account when assigning liabilities for ethical violations, right? That's why you should simulating real world applications as much as possible when building algorithms. This is very risky for the highly regulated industry. When I work with bank or healthcare, they're so cautious about using real world data because they don't want to expose that to people. But the reality, if you don't do that, you won't be able to monitor the performance, right? You really don't know, because if you use sample set of data, it can be a wrong sample size of data. And then secondly, you got to establish a process for end users to provide feedback. To open up that discussion, the forum for feedback will continue to ensure your model is maintaining the optimal performance level for everyone. And then you also need to have a cadence to review feedback from customers, independent users, with data scientists together, right? Constantly optimize the model, because the model, when you build, at the point in time, maybe you only have a small set of sample data with one area, one cross-functional area, then you want to expand that as you evolve with data, you incorporate more data. You know, the things you do might be different, so you need to constantly evolve and optimize your model. So that's how, in my opinion, you can do to reduce the bias in AI, right, from people, data, and process perspective.
Sourabh, anything you want to add before we go?
Yeah, I think most things that Helen said, like, they definitely resonated with me. I think two things I would add is, like, one, I think, like, at some point we need to think of ML model deployment as like design research, where I think, like, in the design field, we have seen like UX researchers understand how different users think, how different users interact with the systems. But so far we have not seen like production deployment of ML models have like interact with design, right? And I think it's kind of like the same thing that we have seen like somewhere else in the same industry work really well. And I think there are learnings that could be borrowed there. I think second, I think on the explainability aspect, I think there has been a ton of research around explainability and interpretability, but I think we haven't done a great job of making the operations easier, where for a live model that is deployed, can you like understand where, like, how different segments might be in reading, like interacting with the models, or basically like the evolution of what factor analysis. And I think those are areas where I think more research investment needs to be made, and just make that operational aspect much seamless, where, hey, can something just, like, you could quote unquote think of this as like ops monitoring in like systems engineering, where can you constantly create fake data that goes in, and like what output are you seeing?
I just remember a very good story, because I just realized that one of the most important biases that we often see is the sample bias, that we don't have enough data. And that's actually something we see a lot. And I just remembered a very good story on that. It's on a mathematician called Abraham Wald, who were employed by the US Army and their Air Force during the Second World War. And everyone who knows machine learning knows that it's only mathematical algorithms, and it's been around since Pythagoras. I don't know. And Abraham Wald was tasked with reinforcing the planes so that they can better withstand enemy fire. And he was tasked with this and being presented with the data and the layout of all of the planes, and where they have been hit by bullets or by shells or whatever from enemy fire. And the natural deduction, especially from the military leaders, was that they saw a lot of red dots on the wings and some other parts of the plane. If you Google his name, Abraham Wald, and airplanes, and you will see the pictures for yourself. But what Abraham really understood pretty quickly was that he was looking at a sample bias. He was looking at only the data from the planes that was shot, that wasn't shot down, that returned home. So when everybody was saying, well, we should reinforce the wings, we should reinforce some of the body, and nobody was looking at the engine, it's a natural thing to do. So they were missing some data, some really key critical data, and he was able to pinpoint that, and it's been highlighted as one of the mathematical victories during the Second World War.
That's actually a great point. I mean, not only there might be the missing data, there are also sometimes often multiple valid opinion or labels for a single data point, right? Because when we all look at the same number, the interpretation of that number might be different, depends on who you ask, right? Gathering those opinions, accounting for legitimate subjective disagreements will make your model more flexible as well.
Yeah, I think very insightful. I think that's a very good aspect also you shared on sample bias. So that's also plays into it. So I think let me quickly, it's not very hard to summarize because there's so many points that you shared this, but just for the audience, at least I took away 3 or 4 of those things. One thing, I think it revolves a lot around data. I think that's what you're saying in terms of getting right data from external parties, maybe, or training the data properly, having proper training data sets, and having right people review it and make sure it actually interacts with the design properly. I think one element around data seems to be one of the biggest themes. Second theme is about the model itself, right? Supervised versus unsupervised, and then how you start training it, right? Because every time your model misbehaves, you start training it with new data and then start learning it. So that time there could be inherent biases. So how you train the model also is what I'm hearing. And third thing I'm hearing also real world in terms of interactions, in terms of feedback, and how the whole cycle works so that you get the feedback loop closed, and also that way you can solve the explainability problems and things like that. So I think a very high level, I'm looking at 3 or 4 things. I know you guys touch upon many things. I don't want to simplify any of that. A lot of good points. I'm sure the recording will be shared with the folks to look at some of those things that you guys shared. So with that, I'd like to, sorry, Vikas, please go ahead.
So one of the things that I would like to add to all of the panels also is that, unconsciously we select our significance p-value as 0.05. But what we figure it out in our binomial hypothesis analysis is not always that it is 0.05. Sometime in certain scenarios, to prove your hypothesis, you have to be cautious, and you may go a little bit higher or a little bit lower to reject your hypothesis, right? So essentially, to avoid the significance, the bias, we really have to choose the right p-value when it comes down to different business scenario, customer scenario, even your internal, right? How you do the campaign management. That is really important when you select your significance p-value.
Sure, yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it goes back to some of that how you train your model, right? I think at a very high level, how you feedback, and then what error rates you want to see, and so on, right? That's what it is.
That's right. So before you build your model, what are the values you want to choose to do the hypothesis? That's where I was emphasized on. Yeah.
Correct. Absolutely. Okay, so with that, let's open it up for questions from